Hi all, I'm Marcin and welcome to my presentation on how we observe DNS amplification attacks from the Internet core. This is joint work with Matthijs, Thomas and Matthias. Alright, let's have a brief recap on DNS amplification attacks. An attacker sends spoof DNS queries to open DNS speakers, which then respond with a much larger response and overwhelm the victim with actually unwanted data. Amplification attacks are measured with honeypots, which are fake amplifiers. Honeypots are usually deployed in some edge or cloud network and apply rate limiting, so they do not cause any real harm during attacks. And one of the current assumptions is that honeypots detect almost all attacks. This is because honeypot observations converge, so after you deploy a couple of honeypots, adding more honeypots does not significantly change your results. However, we questioned this because the internet and DNS infrastructures are a bit more complicated. And that's why we utilized an IXP, which provides a view on these attacks from the internet core. And as you can see, one major advantage of the IXP is that you also observe how real amplifiers are misused, something that honeypots miss. So you might observe the requests, but also the amplified responses at the IXP. In this talk, I will briefly tackle the following research questions. First, does an IXP observe additional DNS amplification attacks? Second, does an IXP contribute new insights into the efficiency of these attacks? And third, is DNSSEC fully exploited by an attacker? That's a short presentation, so you will find all the exciting details in our long paper. Overall, to answer these questions, we make the following contributions. We contribute a method to infer DNS amplification attacks. We conduct a comparative measurement study using complementary data sources, and we detect a new DNS attack practice. Let's start with the first question. So, in our work, we make use of 4 vantage points, and clearly we use sample packets from an IXP for an in-network perspective, but we also use attack information from a large honeypot platform. We make use of OpenINTEL data, which performs daily scans for large parts of the global DNS namespace. And we also use internet-wide scanning data from Shodan, but that's not relevant for this presentation. In contrast to honeypots, IXPs also observe legitimate DNS queries. And in order to detect malicious queries, we made a key assumption here. And the assumption is that attackers reuse names that lead to large responses. And that's why we define 3 so-called selectors to find potential candidate names which are misused. So first, we select names that provoke the largest responses. This includes every query type, which allows us to find attacks utilizing completely new or unusual query types. But of course, one of the most convenient ways to produce large responses are any requests, and that's why we explicitly count any packets for each name. The third selector is special because it acts as ground truth. We select the most common names towards DOS victims, which have been identified by honeypots. Alright, so we have 3 selectors, but how many names do we select with each selector? And for that, we calculate the selector consensus, which we define by the Jakarta index. So if you take a look on the graph below, we incrementally increase the number of names per selector and calculated then the Jakarta index. At first, the selectors seem quite different. They detect different names. However, we increase the top end size and realize that the selectors find almost the same names, but with a different order. And then at around 29 names, we find the highest point of agreement. And that's also the number that we used, because after that, the selectors start to disagree by adding different and significant names. So overall, that's great, because the CCC ground truth selector actually confirms the names found by the other selectors, which do not have any ground truth knowledge. So we have a set of names which are very likely to be misused for attacks. And now as a next step, we checked if we really find hosts that exchange many queries or responses with these names. And we found such extreme cases for almost all candidate names. And these cases obviously were classified by us as attacks. So we basically apply thresholds to query rates for specific names to detect attacks. But again, please see the paper for the full details. Here's the overall statistic on attacks. During our initial measurement period of 3 months, the honeypots detected 31,000 attacks, and we detect 26,000 attacks at the IXP. So the most surprising fact here is that honeypots and the IXP only have an overlap of 4%. So overall, IXPs contribute new additional attacks. Let's continue with the second question. Here we try to infer how efficient current DNS attacks are. We started with OpenINTEL data, which we use to estimate the any response sizes for all the names that are scanned by them. So OpenINTEL does not issue any queries, however they scan for many common query types, so this is the sum of the individual resource record sizes. Then we plotted the CDF and highlighted the range of the currently misused names in red. As you can see, attackers are already in the long tail and are doing pretty good in cherry picking the names with large amplification factors. However, they still could improve by an order of magnitude by selecting names in the gray area. Since this analysis is only an estimation, and we wanted to find out how the real DNS ecosystem reacts to any requests. And that's why we also looked into the IXP data, and we inspected real attack traffic. And here in this plot, we sorted several misused names by the timestamp of the first attack and plotted the distribution of the response sizes. So we have a violin plot. The first names rather exhibit a bi- or trimodal distribution, which basically means that any requests have a rather ineffective amplification in many cases. However, again at the last name, peacecorps.gov, we see that almost all responses reach 4,000 bytes, and we do not see small responses. This shows that the DNS attacks with any queries are still viable and that attackers improve their attack efficiency over time. Alright, let's discuss the third question. So DNSSEC and its signatures lead to large zone sizes, and that's why we checked whether it is fully exploited by attackers. Fortunately, we were able to fingerprint a major attack entity, which allowed us to understand its decision-making process. So this plot quantifies attack traffic for misused names, and we observed clear transition between these names, which also appeared to be sorted. There would be no such clear transitions in the case of multiple independent attackers. So this is a single attacker, and we actually found more fingerprintable features in the paper. But for now, I want to say that we not only observed name reconfigurations, but also relocations. So the central attack infrastructure of the attacker moved 2 times, and we inferred this based on the topological information at the IXP. It is also important to note that this attacker is responsible for 60% of attacks at the IXP, but was almost invisible to the honeypots. We also found the reason why the attacker changed the name. So again, we used OpenINTEL data to estimate the annual response sizes for misused names, but this time for each specific day on which the name was misused. And only then. So for example, the name represented by the blue line had an annual response size around 5,000 bytes at the beginning of June, but then dropped below 4,000 bytes. And then the second name was used. As you can see, we observed a staircase pattern for all names, and we found that this is due to a double signature rollover for the zone signing keys. So this rollover method actually doubles the number of signatures by introducing a duplicate set of signatures. And of course, this inflates the zone. This is quite an inefficient way to perform rollovers, which is why most DNS software vendors actually do not recommend it. We cannot say whether the attacker understands DNSSEC this well or just selects names which lead to large response sizes, but clearly the attacker always selects names in inflated state. So bad DNSSEC practices lead to misuse of specific names, which then again allow the attacker to increase its amplification factor. As the last part of this talk, I want to present a brief validation of our observations. So for validation, we also used a DNS-based method. We inspected the caches of all DNS resolvers worldwide. Overall, we checked the cache hit ratio for multiple names, so whether these names are present in a resolver's cache or not. Next to the misused names, which are highlighted with a red star here, we did this also for names which we did not observe attacks for. And in this plot, we sort the names by the Alexa rank. So Facebook.com is ranked high and also has a high cache hit rate, so this seems normal. However, if we compare peacecorps.gov with AmeriCorps, we find an unusually high cache hit ratio for the misused name, although the name has a similar Alexa rank. In our paper, we argue that this high cache hit ratio indicates usage due to attack activities. Also, for this particular name, a recent presentation from a DDoS mitigation provider actually linked peacecorps.gov with a booter. And our study further describes how the attack entity has evolved before choosing this specific name. So, let me conclude this talk. IXPs observe additional attacks because there's only a 4% overlap with honeypots. As the IXP showed, any queries are still very effective, but there are still some names which would allow even larger amplification factors. And last but not least, we saw that bad DNSSEC key rollover practices are misused because they lead to significantly larger responses. And with that, I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.